nor Avio Medical Wing. After waking up again, Maximilian was released from the Medicare pod, and a wave of pain and ache filled his senses. Breathing hurt. By the spirits, it hurt. But the pain was good. It reminded him that he was alive, and that his last conversation with the princess wasn't the product of some fever dream or hallucination. The nurses were quick to attach a respirator over his nose and mouth before guiding him to a changing room, where a package awaited him. A package containing something he thought he'd never see again. His clothes. Wyatt Staples had been sincere in his claim that his possessions would not be taken away from him. After putting on an elegant yet comfortable green, golden, and white garb, one of his favorites, with a roaring lion's head on his chest, he asked when he would be escorted to his cell, only for the head physician to inform him that, by order of the princess, he wasn't to be retained and was to be treated as a guest, not as a mere prisoner. The possibility that the princess was still trying to win him over occurred to him, but at the same time he doubted the princess, politically savvy as she was, would press on after his rejection. Free to roam and do as he pleased, the first thing he did was check on Casimir's condition. The young cousin was nearly unrecognizable. Not in body, despite the 2 cybernetic prosthetics fitting his missing limbs, but in spirit. Maximilian could see it. All the signs were there. He'd seen it many times throughout his long career, the dejected look in his eyes, the lacking spark, the defeat visible in his expression, and the palpable fear held in his gaze. "Little Kay, please talk to me." Maximilian tried to speak to him, but the young Kay refused to talk. He'd been trying for nearly half an hour, but nothing worked. He felt terrible for the young Sen, and a pang of guilt echoed in his heart. "I should have stopped Felicity's delusions, threatened to resign. Whatever did this to you?" he said with raspy, pained words, his voice lacking the boom and presence he was so proud to carry. Depending on the princess's next move, it would be gone for several months at the very least, or weeks. He stared into Casimir's eyes for long moments, expecting an answer, but Casimir looked away. "The pardon. The white stag comes," Casimir whispered fearfully. Maximilian turned to him. "Little Ken?" he asked. After hearing him speak at long last, Casimir reacted to his voice as if only then acknowledging his presence. "Maximilian," Casimir whispered, terror visible in his eyes. "But you died. The white stag, he comes, Maximilian, he comes for me." Before Maximilian could ask what Casimir was talking about, a stretcher was hurried into the medical wing, followed by a squawking, agitated. He recognized the man instantly, as did Casimir. The young Khan's body went rigid, his eyes went wide, his teeth began to chatter, and in mere seconds, he was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. The roaring thunder watched as Wyatt Staples was placed on a regular bed, and much to his surprise, several nurses and assistants swarmed him. The commotion ended almost as abruptly as it started, with those around him sighing in relief and moving away from the bed. The black-haired man now rested on it. Only the auntie remained by his side, though less agitated. Turning to Casimir, he watched as his eyes remained glued to Wyatt, unwilling to blink. "Warning, patient heart rate is increasing to dangerous levels," the Medicare AI announced. "Casimir, listen to me," Maximilian pleaded, blocking Casimir's line of sight. "Wyatt Staples is unconscious. He's not here for you. Listen to me, little Ken. You'll see your father, mother, and siblings again. As long as I remain, he won't harm you again." "Father?" Casimir whispered. After a few seconds of silence, he relaxed and blinked a few times before tears dripped across his cheeks like salty waterfalls. "I'm sorry, Father. I failed you," he said once, then closed his eyes, covering them with his left trembling hand in shame and disgrace. Maximilian had seen men and women shatter before, but never quite like Casimir. From the moment he laid eyes on the young cousin, he knew Andrew's favored son was ill-suited for combat. He couldn't deter him away from that path. It wasn't his place to do so. The best he could do was give advice, temper his ambitions with reality, and show him what the academy wouldn't. He gritted his teeth, cursing Felicity's name again before he stood up. "I'll go see Wyatt Staples. You're safe, Casimir. He won't hurt you." Casimir didn't reply to him. It didn't matter. Maximilian turned and made his way. Maximilian made his way to Wyatt's bed. The auntie reacted to his presence but didn't budge from his position. "What happened to him?" Maximilian asked. "Fainted," the auntie replied. "My fault." Wanted to make sure Maniac was fine. Maximilian analyzed the Yanti as he spoke, concluding that the alien posed little threat and was likely a technician or mechanic, judging by his tools and suit. I see. In that case, I won't ask how that happened. However, this presents an inconvenience for me. I wish to ask Sir Wyatt what he did to Casimir. Ken, you don't know? The auntie asked. Haven't seen it? Now that piqued Maximilian's curiosity. I woke up not too long ago, and I don't have access to the local network, he explained. What's your name? Yanti Gino, the Yanti replied casually. Dipping a hand into one of his pockets, he pulled out a datapad and tossed it to Maximilian. There. Enter the network. Most viewed recent public file. See for yourself. Raising an eyebrow, Maximilian followed Gino's instructions and entered the ship's network. Almost instantly, he located the file the Yanti mentioned, sitting at the forefront of everything else. Pressing on it, a video began to play. At first, he thought it was a movie, as a dramatic entrance, jumping out of a fighter and onto a hangar bay, appeared on screen. That belief died when the first shots were fired, claiming 4 lives. It was video footage taken from a helmet's camera. Silently, Maximilian watched the recording of Wyatt's incursion aboard the Gallant Venture. It was clear that the video had been edited, mixing scenes taken from Wyatt's camera and the Gallant Venture's security footage. The callous efficiency carried by the pilot impressed him. His ruthlessness earned his approval, and his moments of mercy and honor moved his heart. But it was the measured brutality that stuck with him the most, as Wyatt tore Casimir's limbs without hesitation and delivered upon Felicity a fraction of what she truly deserved. The video ended with the arrival of 3 Royal Marines and Wyatt's declaration that the ship had been captured. Maximilian returned the datapad to Gino and looked down at Wyatt's unmoving form for long, silent moments. There were faint embers of anger inside him, but nothing more. Casimir's treatment, whilst tragic, brutal, and even cruel, was ultimately deserved. Nevertheless, the anger was but a whisper compared to the respect and approval soaring within him. Impressive, right? Wormbrain is kind when he's not trying to kill stuff, Gino said suddenly. Wormbrain? Maximilian asked. I was under the impression you were his friend, Yanti. Friends? Maybe. I don't know. I like Wormbrain. Insane but not crazy. Good pilot, gives me lots of data. We see eyes to eyes, Gino explained, turning a pair of eyes to Maximilian. Good pilot is an understatement. Maximilian tried to chuckle, but ended up coughing instead. Trying to do anything more complex than talking was proving to be a rather uncomfortable challenge. And you must be the Roaring Thunder. Another great pilot. Pleased to meet. Got much data from your fight. Looking forward to examining fighter remains, Gino said enthusiastically. Before Maximilian could say anything, Wyatt stirred from his slumber. He opened his eyes and groaned, grimacing as he sat up while caressing the back of his head. Wormbrain! Gino cried out happily, his tail slowly moving up and down along with his tiny hops of joy. Thought I killed you? You damn nearly did after what you told me, Wyatt exclaimed in protest. Then he noticed Maximilian standing on the other side of his bed. Startled, he jumped out of bed and politely bowed his head before the noble old instincts and teachings taking over his body before he could think about his actions. There's no need for that, Sir Wyatt. Remember, Maximilian said with some difficulty. Wyatt composed himself a moment later, remembering where he was and who he was talking to. Apologies, Lord. Apologies, Sir Maximilian. Well, seeing as I didn't kill the maniac, I go now. Lunch nearly over and don't want to miss it. We'll talk to you later, maniac. Sorry again. We'll try not to do it again. No promises, Gino said before turning around and all but running away before a reply could be given. The anti-Gino is peculiar, Maximilian said. He is, Wyatt admitted. But thanks to him, I was able to survive long enough during our encounter. That explains much. I suspected you were piloting a modified fighter, Maximilian said. But it seems you're more than just a pilot, Sir Wyatt. Hardly, Wyatt replied. Don't be so humble that such a virtue becomes a detriment. Take your achievements for what they are. Embrace them. Revel in them. But never allow them to cloud your vision. Our greatest moments of glory mark who we are, while our mistakes remind us that we are not faultless. Embrace them. Remember them, the lone wolf proclaimed with utmost certainty. Wyatt's eyes widened for a moment, taking in the wisdom in those words, but confusion still reigned in his mind. "I'll be sure to remember your advice, Sir Maximilian, but I don't know what you're talking about." "Truly," Maximilian smiled under the respirator. "Please, Sir Wyatt, I insist once more that you call me by my name. You've earned that and much more. As for what I'm talking about, it seems you're unaware of the public video showcasing your incursion aboard the gallant venture." Wyatt opened his mouth, but words failed him. It only took him a few seconds to conclude whose hand was responsible for that. He wasn't angry. In truth, he didn't care if everyone saw it, and he was certain that Clara would make sure to erase any offense he'd made in the heat of the moment. "Were you not aware?" Maximilian asked after seeing Wyatt's reaction. "I'm yet to receive the implants that'll let me access the network," Wyatt answered dryly. Maximilian nodded in understanding, then turned his gaze to Casimir's Medicare pod. "Your venture was many things, Wyatt Staples. I'm surprised you didn't kill them." "I had orders not to," Wyatt replied, following Maximilian's gaze. His vision focused and zoomed in slightly, allowing him to see a trembling Casimir Khan. He turned to Maximilian, and at the same time Maximilian returned his attention to him. "I don't regret what I did to him. Deserved or not, he was my enemy, and—" Wyatt stopped when Maximilian raised a hand. "You don't need to justify yourself, Sir Wyatt. I don't approve of what you did to Casimir, but I have no authority nor standing to judge you. Bested and defeated in battle as I was, my voice rings no value. We were enemies. Felicity moved to attack first. The blame is hers to carry. The consequences of her monumental failure shall be hers to burden. But House C won't stand idle. Not against the princess, and certainly not against you." Maximilian paused only to lean forward slightly, his voice hushed as he continued. "Andrew Khan is considered by many to be the brightest and greatest Khan born in generations, even more so than that sniveling worm that is his father Tamaran. He is not to be trifled with, Sir Wyatt. Wyatt, I fear that with what you've done to his son, you've gained a dangerous enemy this day. He will not sit idle, be sure of that. This is my warning to you." Maximilian leaned back as he finished speaking. Wyatt held his gaze, searching for treachery, for lies. He found none. The man was telling the plain, unvarnished truth. With a single nod, Wyatt acknowledged the warning. "Thank you, Maximilian. Think nothing of it. Consider it a friendly exchange of information between fellow great and talented pilots," Maximilian replied. Then his tone shifted slightly, softening. "But if I may, I have a request. Should you indulge me, I would be in your debt." Wyatt narrowed his eyes. "That depends on what you're asking." Clara and Cynthia had warned him never to give his word too freely. "Could you speak to Casimir?" Maximilian asked, turning toward the trembling man. "Assure him that your retaliation is over, that you will not come for him. It may not give him peace, but it may grant him release from the terror gripping his heart." Wyatt didn't hesitate. "Guide me to him." Maximilian blinked, surprised, nearly doing a double take. He had expected to negotiate, to appeal to Wyatt's sense of honor, but Wyatt's answer had been immediate and sincere. "You'd forgive so easily?" The words slipped out before Maximilian could stop them. "Forgive? No." Wyatt shook his head. "But I don't hate him either. We were enemies. Now he's our prisoner. I have no reason to hurt him again." Maximilian studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If so, then stand behind me." He led Wyatt toward Casimir's medical pod. Casimir twitched violently, shaking his head. Is the white stag gone?" His voice was fragile, cracking under the weight of fear. Then, as though answering himself, he shook his head more forcefully. "No, he's here. I know he is. The Parian comes for me." "Casimir," Maximilian said with more force, pressing a hand against the pod's glass. "Little Casim, listen to me. Wyatt Staples isn't here for you. Remember my promise, I won't let him hurt you. He's come to talk. Nothing more." Slowly, with a trembling hand, Casimir moved his left hand away from his chest. The pod beeped a warning. His heart rate was spiking dangerously. His fingers twitched as his gaze flicked toward Maximilian, then toward Wyatt. The moment he saw Wyatt, he froze, terror gripping him like a vice. But as he continued staring, something shifted. The cold, uncaring void he expected in Wyatt's heterochromatic eyes wasn't there. Instead, he saw something else. Indifference. A stony, unreadable expression. "You?" Casimir swallowed hard, still trembling. "Ghost? No. Apparition. Revenant. Wraith. Wraith. You're a wraith. Have you come to claim my life?" Maximilian turned to Wyatt, gesturing for him to speak. No, Wyatt's reply was simple, steady. You lie. Casimir's teeth chattered as he gripped his right elbow, clutching the metal and flesh where his limb had been replaced. I know you lie. You moved through the ship, whisking away souls into your hungry gullet. Life-taker. Wraith. He mumbled almost incoherently, voice teetering on the edge of madness. Wyatt sighed. Believe what you want, Ken. But I have more important things to do than play into your fantasies. His tone remained unmoved. I did what I had to do. I regret nothing. And I would do it again without hesitation. His voice hardened. You attacked us, threatened us, promised nothing but death or worse. Casimir stiffened. Wyatt exhaled slowly. I don't hate you, Casimir. We were enemies. Simple as that. You can hate me if you want. I don't care. Taking a step forward, he locked eyes with the wounded man. But I promise you this, if you come again as an enemy, I will kill you. The words settled between them, heavy as steel. If you're willing to kill someone, then be ready to put your life on the line. I'm willing to do that. Are you? He turned away, breaking eye contact at last. Looking back at Maximilian, he asked, Will that be enough? Maximilian nodded. It is. Casimir's trembling had visibly lessened. The threat had been clear, but it came with no promise of further retaliation. The choice of the future lay in Casimir's hands now. Heal and rest, little Khan. Maximilian murmured. Casimir slowly closed his eyes. Maximilian watched as Casimir's trembling visibly diminished. The threat had been clear, but it carried no promise of further retaliation. The future now rested entirely in Casimir's hands. Heal and rest, little Khan? Maximilian murmured. Casimir nodded weakly, closing his eyes. Turning to a passing medic, Maximilian placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Excuse me, do you know where my armor is located? The assistant's cybernetic eyes flickered briefly before she responded. Her Majesty has prepared personal quarters for your use, Lord User. I can summon an escort if you wish to retire. Your clothes will be returned to your quarters shortly. Do so. Maximilian released her. The assistant bowed slightly before hurrying off. As she left, he turned to Wyatt. If you have the time, I wish to give you something, Sir Wyatt. Wyatt smirked faintly. If I'm going to call you by your name, Maximilian, then use mine too. Maximilian's unseen smirk mirrored his. Then let it be so, Wyatt Staples. 2 Marines arrived less than a minute later to escort Maximilian to his quarters. The trip was uneventful until they arrived. Inside, he found a standard officer's room, except for the ruined, twisted armor displayed in the corner. The only piece missing was his helmet. He almost chuckled. Almost. It seems Her Majesty has chosen to hold on to your trophy for safekeeping, Wyatt mused. Maximilian merely approached his armor. Most of the damage was cosmetic, but the internal systems were compromised. It was little more than a barely functioning pile of metal and circuits now. And yet, it was still useful. A small, nostalgic smile crossed his lips as he slowly ran a hand over the battered plates. It took me 10 years to customize my armor to my exact specifications, nearly as long as my fighter. I evolved and readapted it, redesigned it more times than I care to admit. My legacy has been written in my achievements, victories claimed, enemies bested, accolades earned. With that, he reached for his chest plate and tore off the lion's maw emblem. Behind it, a concealed panel flickered to life. Typing in a code, Maximilian unlocked a hidden compartment. Inside were 5 data chits, still connected to the suit's internal circuitry. One by one, he removed them. Turning, he presented them to Wyatt. I've never been suited for a teaching role, Maximilian admitted. I lack the patience for it. But during our duel, Wyatt, I saw your immense potential. Unpolished as it was, it shined through. His voice grew firmer. I cannot pledge myself to House Astor, nor pretend neutrality without consequences. But I can give you this. He urged Wyatt to take the chits. The younger pilot did so, holding them with curiosity. Inside these chits is my recorded legacy, Maximilian continued. My training routines, simulations, viable modifications, implant suggestions, records of my victories, the lessons imparted to me since I left my house's lands, everything. He tightened his grip on Wyatt's shoulder, ignoring the pain it caused him. His voice, raw but unwavering, carried a challenge. Make good use of it. Learn from it. Surpass me, Wyatt Staples. Surpass me. Wyatt was momentarily stunned. He could feel the weight of what had just been given to him. He lowered his head in thanks, holding the data chits with reverence. Maximilian smirked. Don't say anything. Wyatt opened his mouth but closed it again. Show me. Maximilian's grip loosened. Go now, surpass me. With a nod, Wyatt left. Maximilian exhaled deeply. His throat, larynx, and lungs burned from speaking so much, but it was worth it. He sank into a chair, allowing the painkillers in his breathing mask to take effect. He remained there for no more than 10 minutes before his door opened. An unexpected visitor. Vorpal's strike, Maximilian greeted with barely contained glee. Roaring thunder, the aged commander replied, stepping forward. I see you're in better health. I'll recover. The two men locked eyes. Redford Kalen's gaze was searching. You must be disappointed, Sirak. You wished to face me in battle, yet you faced another instead. Maximilian chuckled, shaking his head. At first, yes, I was. But your pupil didn't disappoint. It had been far too long since I felt the thrill of a real battle. My own mistakes and overconfidence caused my defeat. He is talented, that young man. Who knows? With proper guidance, he could become a golden ace. Perhaps even go beyond, a new lone wolf to replace me. He smirked slightly, half joking. Redford scoffed. I doubt he has any interest in becoming a lone wolf. I thought the same, Maximilian nodded. After witnessing everything he's capable of, I fear the path of a lone wolf is not suited for him. He's too loyal to House Astor. He has no desire to claim glory for himself. A poor candidate in that regard, wouldn't you agree? Grinning, Redford continued. What do you plan to do now? For the first time in his life, Maximilian was pathless. He exhaled. Perhaps I'll return to my home planet, take up my uncle's mantle as a sommelier, as was intended from the start. It's been decades since I last tasted alcohol. Redford chuckled. Surely you jest. Men like us would go insane within a month. True. The aged commander's smile faded slightly. You assume correctly. I didn't come here just to chat. Maximilian arched a brow. Why? Wyatt told me what you gave him, Redford said simply. I came here to thank you personally. Rest assured, what you've given him will be of tremendous aid. Maximilian smirked, but Redford pressed on. Will you truly rest easy? Be satisfied with what you've done? Maximilian exhaled. Facing you in combat was a tantalizing dream, I suppose. He trailed off before shaking his head. Then again, what sort of fighter pilot wouldn't look forward to testing their mettle against Redford Kalen? The man who refused to become a lone wolf. The man who decapitated over 100 enemy fighters by himself in a single engagement? His voice carried both admiration and respect. Redford raised an eyebrow. And Wyatt? Maximilian's smirk returned. Rest assured. Vorpal's strike? The Wolfhound did enough to satisfy my thirst for combat, and he humbled me in the process. Wolfhound? Redford repeated. Maximilian nodded. After seeing what he's done, experiencing his capabilities firsthand, exchanging words with him, what else is he but a wolfhound? Loyal, dutiful, kind to his allies, but to his enemies. His smirk widened. A ravenous, ruthless beast. Redford contemplated his words for a long moment. Then, without acknowledgement, he turned away. We'll be in the system for the time being, he said over his shoulder. Maximilian merely watched him go, smiling to himself. Foreseeable future. But once my princess is done with her business regarding the rebels, I offer you the chance to face me in battle. Not physical, of course, our training chamber will suffice. Maximilian smiled gleefully. Eternal garden. Estelle took in the magnificence of the ample nature and agricultural reserves. Marks of the protracted battle against Drazen forces were evident everywhere he looked. Scattered casings, burned patches of grass, torn trees, and countless scorch marks remained as evidence of a fierce battle. Drazen corpses had been piled up and burned in a clearing not too far away. He could see the smoke coming from their charred remains. A pity. Dead Drazen offer little, but their bodies are still useful. Most fascinating, he said, his words echoing inside his helmet. It seems my earlier deductions and studies were incorrect. I wonder if it is due to negligence, the gap in time since those publications were written, or if the Drazen have changed over time. Then again, I believe this is the first time anyone has boarded an intact and functioning cattle ship as anything other than branded cattle. None of his 6 bodyguard escorts replied to his comment. They never did. Estelle chuckled to himself. I never thought Royal Marines could be so dull. Do you ever talk? Estelle asked, but no answer was given. The Royal Marines maintained a reasonable distance from him, making sure to cover every angle of attack without standing too far away from another Royal Marine or himself. They would react and move quickly to save him or support each other if anything happened. Although he did not love the military, warriors, and soldiers, he wasn't an uptight simpleton or idiot. He understood the need for their professions and accepted it as an absolute necessity. Checking on his map, Estelle aligned himself with the quickest path leading to one of the nurseries. Princess Clara had permitted him to explore and document as much as he desired before the assault on the planet took place, as he'd be needed for the following negotiations. That suited him just fine. As eager as he was to claim his ultimate prize from thousands of healthy, living, and relatively harmless Drazen, the millions upon millions of saplings in cryostasis called to him. Just imagine what I could learn from an ample population. 10,000? No, 20,000. A feasible population with an ample spectrum for live societal observations and a steady influx of specimens for study and experimentation. I could spend decades studying them. Oh, the things I will learn, adapt, and discover, he said, already envisioning all the publications he'd write, the developments he could uncover and employ, and the glory, fame, and prestige that would come with them. He marked the site of potential study for later research as the fire of ambition flared once more. The Royal Marines easily opened the doors, and the same ugly aesthetics covered the large, long hallways, floor, walls, and ceiling. If only the Drazen had a finer appreciation for decor and beauty. I wonder if Drazen raised from saplinghood by controlled social norms and revised education would develop a different artistic, philosophical, and theological viewpoint. What do you think? He asked his escort. But as always, they remained silent. Estelle sighed. I would appreciate it immensely if I could have feedback other than my own. We're here to protect you by order of the princess, one of the Royal Marines finally responded. Maintaining your life and security intact is our mission. Your studies are irrelevant to us, replied the lead Royal Marine. Ah, so you can talk at least, Estelle replied, bemused. You may believe that my studies are irrelevant to you, Royal Marine, but we both know that's far from the truth. It is thanks to people like me, people of science, study, and students of the nobler arts, that you can more easily carry out your duties. It is entirely possible that, thanks to me, in but a few years' time, a new, effective weapon against the Drazen will be developed. That way, you'll be able to carry out your massacres and pointless need for combat with increased ease and effectiveness, he said, pride puffing out his chest. He expected the Royal Marines to apologize or try to counter him. Alas, the silence returned. Honestly, you need to add courtesy as one of your training regimens, he muttered. Surrendering in his efforts to obtain a conversation partner from the Royal Marines, Estelle instead focused his attention on the architecture and design of the ship around him. The hallway was nearly 3 times more ample and twice as high compared to the standard regulations applied to Principality designs. It made sense, since the Drazen were taller than humans and required a larger space to move around comfortably. It appears my earlier observations regarding aesthetic choices lacked crucial information. The Drazen seem to put immense value in exterior appearances, hence the almost beautiful and captivating design of their ships' hulls. That appreciation dies on the inside, replacing it with mundane comfort and crude but efficient design. Intriguing, most intriguing. It is my personal opinion that this is a reflection of their hunting tactics and how they perceive themselves. A most curious visualization of their psyche. Further investigation and experimentation will be required. Estelle said aloud as his eyes carefully examined everything around him. As he advanced, Estelle continued making observations whenever something caught his interest, quickly adding it to his notes or marking a place for potential investigation. He was halfway to his destination when something broke his concentration. He stopped and furrowed his brow, sniffing deeply as a faint, rancid smell tickled his nose. Computer, run armor diagnostics, he ordered. Running diagnostics, the monotone voice of his suit's computer responded. Diagnostics completed. All systems are operational, no failures detected. Then why am I smelling this rank scent? Estelle asked in disgust. Pulling out his datapad, he ran a manual diagnostic on his suit, but the result was the same. It said that his armor was completely sealed and that the olfactory filters were working properly. "So what's wrong with my armor?" "Is everything all right, Lord?" the leading Royal Marine asked without looking at the nobleman. "It's nothing," Estelle replied, putting on a brave face and storing his datapad. "Let us continue," he proclaimed, despite doing his best to breathe as little as possible. But as he advanced, the rancid smell became worse, more pungent. When it nearly made him gag, he tried to breathe through his mouth. It worked for a time, but eventually, he began to practically taste the stench, and that was worse than merely smelling it. He came to a halt at a crossroads, noticing that the stench was coming from whatever was in the hallway to his right. Consulting his map answered nothing. Just what can produce such a vile odor, he asked himself. Cautiously, against his better judgment, now clouded by scientific curiosity, he turned to face the hallway and walked down its path. "Lord Estelle, that's the wrong way," the lead Royal Marine warned. "The nursery isn't going anywhere. I am free to explore, am I not? As you are here to protect me, surely there's nothing I should fear, correct?" Estelle countered, barely able to keep his composure as the stench assaulted his nostrils. No reply came from the Royal Marine, only silent compliance. They advanced as one through the hallway, while Estelle did his best to maintain an appearance of strength. But with each step he took, the difficulty increased. He heaved, feeling bile bubble at the entrance of his stomach, when the stench suddenly grew in intensity. The gates of what appeared to be a large storage bay were partially open, and he could hear faint noises coming from within. Stepping into the room, Estelle had to force himself to swallow the burning vomit rising in his throat when he discovered the source of such a repugnant smell. It wasn't a storage bay. It was a cattle pen. His eyes widened, his lips trembled, and his senses ignored the burning in his throat and the sour aftertaste as his eyes unwillingly absorbed every detail meticulously. Humans. Hundreds, no thousands of humans inside large holding cells and pens, but there was no recognition in their terrified eyes. Intelligence? Sapience? Yes, but not recognition. They were filthy, unwashed, naked, and basking in their own filth. Life support worked, keeping them fed and alive, but other crucial systems, like waste disposal, were still non-functional. Worse, every human couldn't be older than 30, if that. Curiously, no children were present either, or at least none that he could see. Their hair was greasy and unkempt. Who knew when was the last time any of them had taken a bath? Anything resembling liberty was foreign to them. As he stared at them, they cowered, afraid of the strange beings with no faces. Some grunted and groaned, making wild gestures. A few scooped feces from the floor of their cells and tried to fling it at him. Some didn't care, too focused on mating to acknowledge anything else. Estelle didn't want to think about it, but a conclusion reached his mind that disturbed him. If life support failed, what would these humans, now reduced to little better than animals, do? Lay down and die? And die, succumb to instincts and fight among each other, resorting to cannibalism just to quench their thirst and hunger that he could imagine, comprehend. But he found a serial number and a branding mark on every human's neck. Their purpose and significance were lost to him, but not their meaning. It wasn't until a handful of feces nearly hit his visor that he finally realized that he had walked well past the entrance and was now deep inside the colossal cattle pen. Then, as if reconnecting his senses, the stench returned, and the long-haired man near L voided his stomach. The humans in the cages began to scream and groan, banging their hands against metal bars. The chaos overwhelmed Estelle, and he ran away without a destination in mind. He ran and ran, trying to ignore the screams, the stench burning in his nostrils, and the cruel simplicity with which the Drazen treated their cattle, their feed. As his lungs burned for air, internally regretting breaking into a run, as it meant he had to breathe in more of the foul, awful, rancid stench, he stumbled against a locked set of doors. He banged a fist against them repeatedly, desperately trying to escape. As another hit was about to connect, the doors hissed and opened, releasing with them a chilling cold. Estelle didn't care. He barged into the new room, wanting nothing more than to escape the barbaric, animalistic screams, the stench, and the room filled with fellow humans, treated as mere animals. It was clear to him, however, that those humans weren't collected or captured, but bred, or worse, conditioned into submissiveness, kept captive and knowing nothing else, since they were born. They were treated like cattle and nothing more by the Drazen. His legs ached, his lungs burned, and he collapsed to his knees as the stench died out and a new, frosty but intense smell filled his nose. Though ragged, he regained control of his breathing and lifted his head. His eyes widened, his breath hitched, and his whole body froze when he saw the decapitated body of a human woman dangling upside down, a mere 3 meters in front of him. Parts of her body were missing, and to his horror, behind the body of the woman, he could see at least a dozen more bodies lined up in the same position. Turning his head to T, Nor Avio War Room, "We will commence our assault," Principality Forces Grand General Peral Bucktail said. His uniform remained the same, despite being in a military room of sorts. Behind him, several men were tending to computer terminals. "Our forces will push through these zones," he explained as a map next to him appeared, showcasing 3 red arrows pushing against the Drazen-held territory. "Once the aliens are committed to their defense, you will strike them down. As long as their Lord Harrower dies, their change of command will be in shambles. Only after that thing is dead and their advance collapses will I agree to join you at the negotiations table." Clara asked her, and Clara nodded once. "It shall be so, Grand General," she said, and the general cut off the transmission. "Redford, are we in position?" "We are, Your Majesty," Redford replied. "We only await your command to begin." "Are the drop pods ready?" Clara asked, her gaze falling on her head officers. As always, Cynthia stood to her right, while Wyatt, now wearing his armor, stood to her left. Milcades was also present, sitting quietly at the end of the table. Lupin cleared his throat. "They are ready for deployment, my princess. Using the fabricator, we were able to craft another 20 drop pods on short notice. In total, we have 48 loaded drop pods ready. They'll be launched in 2 volleys with only a few seconds of difference between them, as per your orders. We've listened to the rebel communications, my princess. They will be deploying a large frontal assault using large numbers of militia transport vehicles and armored vehicles. They're purposefully avoiding using their remaining proper military forces for this assault, but some will lead the militia to ensure discipline and encourage them to keep fighting," G said. His eyes narrowed. "They don't have many atmospheric fighters, but they have enough missile batteries to keep the Drazen's AA measures occupied." "Do they know we're here?" Clara asked. "The Norvia stealth capability has been significantly diminished, but they are functional. The Drazen know we have space superiority, yet they are blind to our movements," informed Saraton. Clara closed her eyes, pleased. "Our remaining forces, Francesco Arcadi and his mercenaries, are ready. Marines and Auxilia forces are eager and prepared in case they are needed, my princess. The Mantis tanks are operational and ready to deploy at your behest," Fabian answered as he proudly inflated his chest and bowed his head. The blonde woman opened her eyes, glancing at Mill, who in return nodded once. "It pleases me to know my head officers are competent and capable. Now we wait for our chance to strike. Redford, you may take overall command." "Gladly, my princess." Redford replied, his eyes focused on the holographic map. Tiny dots moved in unison, representing ground forces, while the screens were vivid, showing footage from the planet and what Norio's cameras could see. Several minutes passed in intense silence until the first engagements commenced. Dozens of vehicles and missile batteries launched their payloads across the skies, while the ground forces confronted scattered Drazen units. The Drazen had superior armaments, and they replied in kind. Missiles fired from concealed positions struck with deadly precision at vehicles, tanks, and artillery units with near impunity. A few vehicles suddenly exploded or melted into slag when a powerful laser beam struck them. Men died in droves, cut down by precise laser fire or shredded to pieces by high-velocity kinetics. The militia forces, it was obvious, lacked shields and were poorly equipped. Even their tanks and vehicles lacked energy shielding emitters, making them easier targets for the Drazen. But the overwhelming numeric difference meant that some Drazen were eventually cut down as the rebel forces continued their relentless assault. Everyone present watched in silence as the battle continued, each minute claiming hundreds of lives. Drazen AA's imp placements around their headquarters are preoccupied with downing rebel missiles, G informed. "Commencing railgun bombardment," said Redford, as his eyes flickered with intensity. He didn't need to sit in the captain's chair for something so simple. Being linked to the network while reducing his immersion and union with the ship would be more than enough. 5 seconds later, everyone watched as railgun strikes impacted all across Drazen-held territory, but none managed to hit their headquarters. The impact was devastating, the projectile speed releasing enough energy similar to that of a low-yield nuclear explosion. Destructive but inaccurate. That was of no concern as Redford spoke again. Launching drop pods. Several new camera views sparked to life as the drop pods were launched out of the Novio, flying for several seconds through space before making contact with the planet's atmosphere. They descended with incredible speed, their trajectory taking them straight to the Drazen's main encampment. The Drazen realized what was coming and turned their most immediate AA placements to face their new enemy. Of the initial 26 drop pods, 7 were destroyed before they could reach their objective. The tactical mines were activated a heartbeat later. Wyatt watched in fascination as a great ball of fire consumed the Drazen's headquarters. The shockwave of the intense explosion was visible from the Novio cameras. The railgun bombardment stopped a second later, only for the second wave of drop pods to pierce through the growing ball of fire and ash and dust. Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the ground itself. Orange fire was replaced by an intense white light as it pierced from the initial ball of death. The blinding light lasted only for a few seconds, and when it was gone, the fire turned blue and white, eventually turning orange and yellow as the surrounding forest was consumed by quickly expanding, raging wildfires. The Drazen headquarters had been utterly obliterated. "Report," Redford demanded. "Initial analysis report that the explosion was caused by a plasma reactor reaching critical," Commander G replied. "It seems the Drazen were careful to hide a colony-grade plasma generator from orbital and ship-grade sensors. The combined destructive potential of our tactical mines ruptured through its protective layers enough to cause a rupture. Drazen fatalities are estimated to be over 200,000. The explosion and the expanding heat wave have sparked several wildfires in the surrounding areas. It is likely dozens, if not hundreds more, will be created in the coming hours. Rebel communications are frantic, and there are many reports that Drazen defensive positions are collapsing or running for their lives. They've been broken." Saraton spoke up next. "Rebel forces have stopped their assault and are withdrawing. Flash burns, blindness, and other casualty reports are starting to mount, some fatalities among them." Wyatt stepped away from his position, his attention solely focused on the screen showcasing the spreading fires and slowly dying ball of fire, ash, dust, and death. Slowly, he removed his helmet, letting it fall to the ground uncaringly. Everyone was staring at him. He didn't know it, but he was smiling. His smile was wide, his teeth were in full display, and his eyes were wide, admiring the destruction with unabashed glee. On a clearing, hundreds of Drazen, nothing more than tiny pinpricks, could be seen running away from a coming wildfire. Unfortunately for them, the fire was faster than they were. In only a few seconds, the fire caught up to them, as a blanket of raging, all-consuming fire covered them. They flailed around, no doubt screaming and wailing in pure agony, as the fire fed on their flesh as mere fuel to burn more intensely. It began as a rumbling in his chest, like a cough, but darker, deeper, and uncontrolled. The cough turned into a chuckle and then became a laugh, a dark, merciless, hate-filled laugh that bellowed from the deepest part of his soul. Wyatt's laugh was the only sound that could be heard in the room. His whole body trembled with pure glee and happiness. "Die!" he shouted as he laughed. "Go die in a fire! Burn, all of you, burn, they're burning. Miss Carla, Guido, Wantum, Walia, everyone, do you see? They burn." Only Cynthia and G had seen him like that before, once on the brink of death. But now he was simply enjoying that which brought him the most joy in his life. Everyone else, though, understood that at that precise moment, Wyatt Staples was truly and completely free.